So three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So in Soto Zen, and maybe not elsewhere in this tradition, we have three kinds of three treasures, and that is the chart on the back of your handout. You see manifesting, maintaining, absolute, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, right? So we find these in the Kyoju Kaimon that we hear during Ryakusatsu or when we receive precepts, right? Dogen teaches about these three kinds of three treasures. So we know what the Buddha is, we know what Dharma is, we know what Sangha is. There's actually three ways to look at these things. So the manifesting three treasures, Ginzen Sanbo, these are the things that appeared in the world historically. These are the things I've just talked about in the life story of the Buddha. This is Shakyamuni as a human being who lived in India 2,600 years ago, we think. Architectural evidence and other things. After his awakening under this tree, he deeply understands the functioning of the universe, or the way reality works, including things like the Four Noble Truths, 12-fold chain of causation, which we'll talk about, those really basic fundamental things. He goes and finds people to share this with, and we call that teaching again the Dharma. Because what he was teaching was really just reality, right? Buddha always said, I didn't make this stuff up. This was here before I was here. I simply can see this now, right? This isn't something, this Dharma is not something I've created. It is actually the reality of the way the universe works. So Dharma is larger than just what Buddha said in the 76 million words, right? Dharma is everything we encounter. So sometimes this Dharma means universal functioning. So we have to be a little bit careful. Which way are we using Dharma? Are we using Dharma, this is something Buddha said, or are we using Dharma to indicate this is the way the universe functions? So although those things are not actually separate, we can make a distinction. So with Dharma, we need to just pay attention to that. And again, the people that the Buddha first taught became the first Sangha. So now we have the origin of the manifesting version of the three treasures, right? The three sort of historical elements. Then we've got the maintaining three treasures, Juji Sambo. So these are the three treasures that we still encounter today, right? Those first elements happened 2,600 years ago. They're long gone. Buddha's physical body is not here. The people he practiced with are not here, right? Whatever he said went out into the air. There was no recording. But there still is something called the maintaining three treasures. So today we still have, for instance, Buddha statues. Well, it's covered because we're doing Sanshin tomorrow, right? We have Buddha statues. We have paintings of Buddha. We have items that represent awakening to us, whatever that means. Some of you might have on your altars at home a stone or a feather or something. It might not be sort of an anthropomorphic representation of Buddha, but somehow we still encounter things that represent awakening to us or remind us to practice. So in early India, early Buddhism, there were no representations of the Buddha as a human being. Because it was said, well, awakening, I mean, how do you picture awakening, right? To picture the Buddha is beyond anything we can sort of make a statue of or draw a picture of. Awakening is bigger than that. However, Buddhism starts to move down the Silk Road, which we'll talk about in a minute. It encounters things like Greek aesthetics. Somehow a century or two later, we have Buddha statues. They look like Greek art, right? And then they start to look like the art of the other cultures that Buddhism encounters as it's going down the Silk Road. So these statues start to look like whatever that culture feels is a representation of something which is sacred, a representation of awakening. So we see a real variety. Start to see a real variety in the way the Buddha is represented. Nonetheless, that is a manifesting Buddha treasure. So sometimes we consider Dharma teachers in this role as the maintaining Buddha treasure, which is interesting, right? So Juji is a term that's sometimes used for the chief clergy in a temple, right? So there's this ongoing sort of association that somebody is holding that space. Somebody is representing awakening. Someone is representing Buddha, even on a day-to-day. So when I'm giving precepts, for instance, and I sit right there, so the preceptor always sits to the right and in front of the altar of the Buddha, right? You're sitting there in place of Buddha, holding that Buddha space. But we can see anybody who's running a temple, and in some ways we can just see anybody who is making those life vows, as some of you have, right? to carry forward the lineage, to make those teachings available, to teach the Dharma and lead practice. We can see anybody in that kind of leadership role as holding that space for Buddha. Dogen kept calling his teacher Old Buddha. If you look at Dogen's writings, when he says, Old Buddha used to say, and we think, well, who is that? That's his teacher, which I think is kind of interesting, right? So these are all examples of maintaining Buddha treasure. If we think Buddha's dead and gone, we need to think again, right? Buddha's right here. Okay, when it comes to the Dharma, we have, of course, sutra books that record Buddha's teachings, things we use to chant from. We've also got many, many, many books of commentary and sutras and things we can watch online and podcasts we can listen to, right? Lots of manifesting, maintaining Dharma treasure. So even if whatever it is a cheap copy, our sutra books are not fancy. Some of them are simply photocopies. Those things are relics of Buddha, at least in my mind. So we don't put them on the floor. We don't throw them around, right? We treat them carefully. That is the Dharma treasure, even though it's a simple piece of paper. We're still able to encounter the Dharma because these things are still available to us. So we treat that with a little bit of care, right? A little bit of respect. So finally, of course, we still have communities of people coming together to practice this crazy thing, to do Zazen work, study, ritual for parts of our practice vision here. So some folks are here today. They're here in person. They're here virtually. Some have left the physical world, but because of their practice, it's possible for us to practice today. So all of our ancestors, all of our lineage, all the people who've practiced at Sanshin, helped to get it started, cleaned the zendo, cooked the meals, right? All of these people are, they've made it possible for us to practice. More folks will come after we're gone. So I hope 50 years from now, Sanshin is still here and people are still practicing. And the reason they're able to do that is that we here have taken care of the practice. We've held it. We've made it available to people. We've maintained the teachings. We've maintained it in body and mind, right? So that maintaining Sangha is not necessarily the people who are here with us in this room right now. It can be bigger than that. Okay. Of course, we also have, we can consider all beings throughout space and time. There's lots of teachings about sentient and insentient beings preaching the Dharma. So maybe our maintaining Sangha is not even all human beings. It can be animals and stones and rocks and mountains and rivers, right? Okay, maintaining Sangha treasure. Last but not least, we have the absolute three treasures, Ittai Sambo, literally one body, three treasures. So if we look at the manifesting three treasures, literally things before one's eyes, the three treasures that are literally before eyes. This is the same gen as Genjo Koan, for those who know Genjo Koan. This is the same gen, something that manifests in front of our eyes. Maintaining three treasures, we have the sense of something that abides, an abiding three treasures. Now we're at absolute three treasures, Ittai Sambo, one body, three treasures. Now Toto-san talks about this quite a lot. So these are three aspects of one reality. These are not things we're going to necessarily touch and hold and carry around, right? Buddha isn't one person who attained awakening. In this case, Buddha is the act of awakening to the Dharma. It is awakening itself. It is not a concrete thing we grab, right? It's the act of awakening. So there is no separation really between Buddha and Dharma, no separation between a person and an action and a subject. There's no sort of person that's awakening to something. This is not something we can actually separate. So Buddha, Dharma, Sangha are already one thing. And if that's true, then the Sangha can't really become aware of awakening as an object out there or do something called waking up, right? There's no Sangha, which is waking up to something out there. There's only one thing happening here, right, from the view of the Absolute. This is what we call unsurpassable true awakening, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. So when we run across this in sutras, in the Heart Sutra in the morning, right, this is one body, three treasures, no separation. So provisionally, we can say that the absolute Buddha treasure is awakening, the absolute Dharma treasure is reality, the absolute Sangha treasure is interconnectedness or harmony. Sometimes we hear the virtue of peace and harmony is the absolute version of Sangha treasure. In this tradition, we say we take refuge in the three treasures, right? There's a fascicle about that in the Shobogenzo. So we need a teacher like Buddha to show us the way. We can't yet see this reality for ourselves. We can see that there's a human being in front of us. We can't necessarily see the reality of awakening yet, We need a teacher to show us that. We need teachings or dharma if we're going to understand what suffering really is. What is the nature of suffering and delusion and all of this, right? We need teachings in order to help us see that, and also how to let go of that. Not only to understand the nature of suffering, but then how do we let go of suffering? How do we liberate ourselves and all beings? And we need others to practice with, for help, for support, to reinforce, encourage our practice. We're about to go into Sanshin, and this is where the rubber meets the road, man. This is where we really see. We need a community 100% wholeheartedly functioning together in order to support that very simple practice of sitting in front of a wall 14 periods a day, doing nothing but eating, sleeping, sitting, walking some kinhin, right? It's really interesting. You can ask Sawyer and to some degree Esho. They typically end up working on, let's make sure everything that gets done needs to get done. And that's a thing, right? Even for a simple thing like we're sitting facing the wall. Who's cooking the meals? Who's sweeping the floor? Who's lighting the candle? Who's ringing the bell, right? It's a very interesting, intensive experience of community, which is what Sanshin is. Okay, so we need to keep that support for carrying out Sanshin, Zazen work, study, ritual, with others who have the same sort of aspiration, who are on this path with us, who have the same direction, right? So we all can support each other in that way. So I like to say to people, if you think it doesn't make any difference whether or not you show up in the Zendo, I beg to differ, right? Simply being present here is something. I used to hear that from teachers, and I'd go, yeah, hearts and flowers. They just want me in the Zendo because they want people in the Zendo, right? So it was a long time before I really kind of got what that meant. It is much harder to show up. It is much harder. People at home may know this. If you're sitting alone, right, you're maintaining your own practice. It's a lot harder to get yourself up and onto a cushion when you're by yourself. It's a little bit easier when there's a group sitting together. You're all doing your own practice. It's like nobody can practice for you, but there's something about coming together as a community to sit, which makes things easier. So I don't care if it's your first time in the Zendo or you've been doing this for 50 years. Showing up makes a difference for you and for other people. Right? That is Bodhisattva activity.